I don't think the coaching is about that 1 hour that you spend with the person. It's what you do after that 1 hour for the rest of your life.
You're listening to the Building a Coaching Culture podcast. If you need to compete and win in the 21st century labor market as an employer of choice, this podcast is for you. Each week, we share leadership development, coaching, and culture development insights from leading experts who are developing world-class cultures in their own organizations. And now, here's your host, J.R. Flatter.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I'm J.R. Flatter. I'm here with my co-host, Lucas.
Hello.
And our distinguished guest, Veronica Lawrence. So glad to have you. I know we tried this once before, but the connectivity wasn't allowing us to do it. So here we are again. I'll just remind everybody and all the listeners and even our distinguished guests that this is a program about building a coaching culture. So building from a leadership development perspective, coaching from a coaching accreditation and coaching perspective, and then culture from a culture development perspective. And it's my understanding, you could tell us more about yourself in a second, that you're a subject matter expert in a lot of those areas. So we're really excited to have you. Just to remind you, our listeners are leaders of complex organizations that are working now in the 23rd year of the 21st century in a hyper-competitive labor market and trying to recruit and retain the world's top talent. So with that, I'll pass the floor to you, Veronica, and just let you brag a little bit about yourself and what you're doing and perhaps your area of expertise. So over to you.
So, JR and the team, Lucas, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm glad that we're able to connect better this time. And this bragging thing, it's kind of hard for me. I can say that I was active duty Navy for 24 years, working at the Pentagon level when I retired, part of the Inspector General team. And then I joined TIBC shortly after I retired. I have a background in industrial psychology, DEI, and change management. So it's a few things in the back burner there, but I think that the biggest gift as a leader and as people is to be able to coach, mentor, and develop those who work with us so that they can take our place in the future. So that's why I'm so excited about the idea of a cultural coaching, because we're developing the critical thinking and analytical skills of our workforce so that they can, lead the torch forward once we move on.
So talk to us a little bit more about, if you would, the field of industrial organizational psychology. What's that all about?
So I think a lot of people think about that with a lot of the HR work that happens behind the scenes. How do you advertise, select, on board? How do you create position descriptions, job descriptions? But one of the things that I really like about the industrial psychology field is the ability to measure employee satisfaction. And so
Mm.
how happy they are with the work that they do, it kind of manifests on their motivation, how engaged they are, how committed they are, and how they bring return to investment to organizations by bringing the best version of themselves to work.
So how does psychology impact culture?
Well, the measuring tools that we use into psychology, the behavioral piece of it that focuses on how people interact together, how we bring people of diverse backgrounds, people of diverse social identities coming into an organization. And it's basically, volunteer selection. We come in and hire people. We don't plan to hire a specific group of people. We hire to a specific skill. And I think when you think about psychology is what makes us work better together, what makes us feel like we're accomplishing something. We talk about motivation, engagement, belonging, commitment, and development. And so those things play a great part in our environment and also in the culture, right? Because how we believe or see others, how we feel about others, kind of shows up in how we behave at work.
So I said once and probably say it again, we're in the 23rd year of the 21st century. How's the workforce different now? And Lucas, I know you're part of that millennial group. I'll ask you first, what does culture mean to a millennial in the workplace?
You think about what Veronica was talking about with the critical thinking and, the motivational aspects and I think part of the motivation what helps there is like, having a little bit of autonomy and people talk about how they don't like being micromanaged all the time and that's something that I feel like our generation is more sensitive to. It's You don't want to be told exactly how to do something, but you want the goals to be ahead of you. So, you have the vision that your leader wants you to work towards, but you have some, leeway in how you're going to figure it out. And that's why that critical thinking aspect is so important, I think, because if you're going to give somebody that autonomy, you have to know that, they're going to figure some things out without going back to you like every 5 minutes. So,
Hmm. So over to you, Veronica, as you work across the generations, and you mentioned DEI earlier, diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you work across the DEI sphere of influence, what are your thoughts on how do we bring us all together?
Well, I think first we need to understand that we're living in a unique time where five different generations are working
Hmm.
in the workplace, right? And every generation has a set of beliefs and an environment that develop how they behave. And then you have all of that in one location, or trying to accomplish multiple goals. And so as a leader, I think we have to be very diverse and have a lot of tools in our kit to be able to bring the best out of different people with different motivations. And I don't mean this just as a someone of a different race or somebody from a different gender. I think that there's diversity in the way that we think and the way that we bring people around. And being able to bring the best out of everyone. Like Lucas, you're probably on my son's generation. He feels like I micromanage and I don't let him make his own mistakes. And so I gotta say that I'm not oblivious to the fact that we have to use different tools available to us as leaders to make sure that every person can bring the best version of themselves. Culture is very complicated in that a lot of times people think, well, culture is it's interchangeable with other things. What people believe, how they feel about the collective norms, how they feel about values, and how they think the leadership applies those procedural justice, distributional justice, and things of that nature shape the culture of the organization. And so I think it is a challenge. I think it is a talent. And again, having five different generations with different motivations makes it even more interesting to be more inclusive. I think that we have to first understand that people are different first, and then we can work on the how inclusive are we. And when we're including people, hopefully they will feel like they belong in the organization and stay for the long haul.
I would be curious to hear your insights, both of you actually. I have my own opinions on this, and maybe I'll share them with you in a sec. How much of what we think is difference in generation, even, well, I'll stick with generations, is age related? Because I remember being 15 and now I'm 60. I know I think and act very differently now than I did then. Lucas is exactly 30 years younger than me. So he and I was always going back and forth on what does that 30 years mean? And will he think and act a lot like me when he's 30? I guess I should start asking myself, are you acting like I was when you were born? So,
Yeah.
I go back to Shakespeare, the seven stages of life. And, I'm now the bespectacled elder behaving and thinking very differently. So I'll go to you, Veronica. What do you think? Is it age related or is it actually generational or some mixture of both?
Well, that's so funny because at the beginning of my career, I probably thought it's like generational, right? Like people from this age behave this way. And I worked for a three-star admiral that was more hip than Lucas. Lucas, I know you're hip, but I'm telling you, the guy wanted every bit of technology. I mean, we couldn't keep up with him. He was so innovative, so impressive in the way that he did things. And he developed group think and then got away from it and talked about inclusivity. So I believe that the environment in which we create kind of shapes some of our values, kind of shapes some of the ways that we behave. But I think it's also a choice of where you stay. You know how people say 50 is the new 30 and 30 is the, whatever
Mm.
those things are. Nobody gave the message to my body because I'm still feel like I'm pushing 50, right? But in reality, I think that the developing of the mind, of the skill, and being able to be understanding and open that not everybody grew up in the same environment is important. And I'll give you an example. My great aunt, who was part of the Great Depression, she doesn't let any leftover food go to
Mm.
waste. I mean, her behavior is like we had to save, save, save because in that
Mhm.
time of need, that's what she learned, and she still behaved that way. In other areas, she's pretty hip. Like, hey, send me an email. I'm like, whoa,
Mhm.
wow. And so I think that our environment affects a lot, and it's called socialization for those in the industrial psychology ground. the experience that we have is dictated by the socialization that we have. We bring that to the
Mm,
workforce, but we can develop skills no matter who we are to be able to understand others and to connect to them. Not bring them to where we are, but go to where they are. And I think that's a trick for leadership too. And in the military, I work with a lot of people that it was like it's hierarchy. You either get to what I am or you're not going anywhere, right? Because
mhm,
it's
mhm,
very straightforward. And the biggest challenge happened when the younger people came in and started challenging and wanting autonomy, wanting not to be micromanaged. And it's a challenge, but I think it's not driven by age. It's the age of your brain, right? How you
mm.
analytically develop and connect to others.
Yeah, somebody mentioned yesterday in a session we were teaching that and she was a pedagogical psychologist, and she said fully 10% of people never break out of adolescence.
I know a couple. I'm sorry.
That's kind of frightening, actually. Lucas, how about you? You're working across generations. We teach different generations.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is age related, but then also the environment. Like if you think about when I was a child, when I was 10 years old, 9 years old, 9/11 happened, and it's like so you think about I mean,
Mhm.
you think about how historical events might have affected different groups of people,
Mhm.
and then, like, thinking about now, like, a 10-year-old during the pandemic, how that might affect them, and then the rest of it is kind of like, okay, like, what are the pop cultural touchstones,
Mm.
which is kinda more superficial, but and then on top of that, I was raised by your generation and you specifically, so it's like our generation's gonna be different because you're not raising us exactly how you were
Mhm.
raised, so
Mhm.
I guess I'm leaning towards the environmental side more than the age group side.
Yeah, I love Veronica. I love your idea of how mature is my brain. That's great. And then Lucas, the environment is certainly relevant. So we do a lot of psychometric testing. I would imagine you're quite versed in that, Veronica. I riff on IO psychology because there's a lot of overstatement of the ability of those tools.
Right.
I'd like to hear your expert insights into that, if you don't mind.
Oh my goodness. You almost going to the psychology of leadership, right? I almost
Yeah.
feel like we're going to that direction. Is it a trade? Is it a skill? Is it
Yeah.
teachable? Is all those other things? I think that when you have tools, they sometimes have some science behind it that can be used as a check engine light to dig deeper and find out what works and what doesn't work. I'll tell you this: there is some good value and good use to it, but it's not the be all type of environment. I went to a DoD school, and it was a tough school. It was 84 days, and it was about DEI and behavioral science. They did a Myers Briggs before we came over, and they grouped us by groups that would never get along and make us
Mm,
work together in solving problems for 84 days. Hardest days of my life. So they
mm,
did something right because there was something fundamentally different about our values that showed up in that test that when we showed up in real person created conflict, which was on purpose, right? They wanted us to purposely be in conflict so that we learn how to go to Tucker's model of the one from norming performing storming
sure.
and things like
Mhm.
that. We couldn't get out of storming. I mean, it was
Mhm.
it was that training pain to learn to get out of storming with different, especially when your values and your sentiments start to come out, and the difference of introvert and extrovert. Someone that it's a feeler. I'm a touchy feely person, and I'm in there with the judgment, the guy that's the judging or things like that. So I think if you're speaking of those type of tools, there's the pace, there's disc, there's many of those tools that people use to see personalities. I think that they allude to some behavioral competencies, but then
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you can't behave outside it. And when I took that Myers-Briggs, for example, in 2013, I took it later and I had changed. I'm like, how 10 years, like 7 years later, I took it and I'm not the same letters, that
Mhm.
I was before. Again, that makes me think, if that's what we're speaking about, that change happens by or the how our brain matures and how we grow and how we change our critical thinking.
How about you, Lucas? I know you've had a 360 assessment and a pretty in-depth feedback session. Was it helpful to you?
I think it can be helpful, if you kinda keep in mind that there's no one size fits all, and, you can find out about yourself by analyzing yourself, and it's kind of a lens to do that because otherwise without constraints, it's hard to kind of figure out what you're going to analyze. So having the structure around it is helpful, but I wouldn't treat it as a be all end all, I guess.
Yeah, I just did a 360 feedback yesterday, and the 360-degree assessment is rate myself on my perceptions of my leadership, and then my bosses and my peers and my customers and my direct reports rate me also, and it gives us this in-depth perception of who we are as a leader, as a person. I always tell people that number one, don't overinvest in this,
Hmm.
nor should you too easily dismiss anything. There's a lot of loud whispers in here, and once in a while we'll see some shouting characteristic.
Right.
And then secondly, preference is not destiny,
Right.
and they're measuring our preference. Well, the personality profiles measure preference. The 360s measure perception. And so perception isn't 100% reality. But then we go back to, okay, there's a gap. I see a lot of EQ gap, emotional intelligence gaps in senior leaders. And how do we begin to change those perceptions and behaviors? So how is the world perceiving you? And then even how you perceive the world impacts your actions and impacts the world's actions with you. So in
Hmm.
some senses, perceptions are reality. But then if we do take action to change perceptions, we have to do it through behavior,
Right.
changing our behavior.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's tough, tough, tough stuff, especially when, as human beings, we tend to come back to our comfort zones.
That kind of reminds me of the Jahari window, when we talked about those things.
Yeah, talk to
Um,
us about that because that's the second time in 2 days somebody's brought that up.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
my God, you must have had a CCS on your team. So we spend a lot of time at Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, is now known as the Defense Cultural Institute, which is a DoD school. And a lot of the time, understanding that I can't remember this quote, but it's a quote about I'm not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. And it's so
Mm,
complex, right?
yeah.
And that's exactly what the Jahari window does, is try to show you an alignment between those three things. And the 360s and things like that give us a vision of the blind spots, right? The spots that we don't see, that other might see, and they might be unknown to us. And then if that's not who we are, I noticed that some leadership gets angry, rebuttal, dismissive, or combative instead of saying there's a gap and I need to self-analyze and then align myself so I can come across to who I really am, so that it's congruent. And so I think that there is a lot to learn from the Johari window, the panels, and looking at what we don't know about ourselves that other people can see. I think my husband and my kids have a great vision of who I am that I don't see it until they tell me, Mom, you came across as this. And it's always good not to be defensive and not to get an attitude when there's a blind spot, so that we can align ourselves to be better. If I don't want to be that person, then perhaps I shouldn't wear that uniform. It's the same thing with racist behavior. A lot of people says, "Well, I'm not racist." Well, some of your behaviors align with racist behavior, so don't wear the uniform. Align yourself with something that is inclusive, and then you come across as inclusive. So it's a work in progress, and I love that kind of work.
So coaching and a coaching leadership style. I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't play one on TV either.
No.
But there's a lot of neuroscience going on in coaching. I think I have some hints about what that might be. I'd love to hear your insights on the neuroscience of coaching and what I would call the magic of coaching because,
Yeah, because you're using a big word, neuroscience, and I don't know much about. I mean, I know about the science, but I don't know the principles, and I don't want to speak out of turn. But I think that there's a deep misconception of what coaching is, specifically the people that are receiving the coaching. And I get a lot of well, you're going to tell me what to do, right? Or you're going to tell me how to
hmm
think, right? Or you're going to tell me how
hmm
to solve that problem. And I think it is important is developing the skill of solving the problems, so that I don't think the coaching is about that 1 hour that you spend with the person. It's what you do after that 1 hour for the rest of your life. So a lot of people's like, I'm not going to pay that amount of money for coaching. Well, you might not pay for that hour, but if it's going to save you 10 years of suffering because you learn a skill that can help you out, that can change your habits and can make you a more effective leader, then it was money well spent. And so I think, and I don't want to talk about the financial aspect, but I'm just giving an idea of the value of coaching. It's not the 30 minutes, it's not the 1 hour, it's the skill that we develop collectively as a team that changes the behavior. And one of the things about coaching for me is finding the smallest expression of a goal so that you can execute it. And once you execute it for more than 21 days, perhaps it becomes a habit that changes your life. And so that's what's important to me about coaching.
So, Lucas, you're a coach. You've received coaching. What are your thoughts?
Guess on the neuroscience, it just reminds me of, just faking a smile can bring serotonin and make you feel better even if you
Mm.
know you're faking it. And so, like what Veronica just said about it's not about that hour specifically. It can be like, even with running, you do like plyometric training, like you do weird stretching and skipping and stuff, or sprinting to show your body how it might work when you're doing an actual run, but you're not like running as if you would in an actual run. So, kind of like
Mm.
having that time to go outside of your comfort zone for an hour and see how it feels and everything. I think that can be useful.
So we talk about a coaching culture, and so we're still in a transition from what I would call a 20th century leadership style and 20th century cultures. In my humble opinion, the days of working in the same place for your entire life are gone. Right? We all have stories of grandparents and friends whose parents worked in the same building doing the same job for 50 years. I think those days are gone. Technology is just advancing too quickly. And so I think the Gen double A's who are coming after the Gen Z's, so the Gen Z's are already in college or they're in the workforce or they're grown already. Millennials are running the world right now. They're CEOs and professors. So we're transitioning into this 21st century leadership styles and 21st century cultures. And so when we say something like leading with a coaching style or building a coaching culture, what does that mean to you, a leader, as a leader, Veronica, but to you as a scholar and also a practitioner of your field? What would our listeners learn about what does it really mean to have a coaching culture?
Oh, that's a tough one. I really think that one of the issues that I'm seeing a lot is that we say it's a coaching culture, but we're using the wrong language, right?
Mm,
You have to use the precise language of what it means. What is it going to accomplish? What is the outcome? And what is the benefit of a coaching culture? I think I have encountered a lot of organizations where people say we want to have a coaching culture, but they can't define it, they can't explain it, they can't
hmm
feel it, and they can't live it.
hmm
So it's really hard when we don't know what it means to you and how it applies to me, not as just the leader, but as the everyday person, right? Because it can be peer to peer coaching, it can be, you know, even your subordinate can tell you something about yourself that can help you and coach you to how better lead them. So I think looking at almost like a 360 vision of what coaching is like, not only coaching down, but coaching vertically,
hmm
coaching, up and
hmm
down the chain. Oh, not the chain. I'm talking about military, but in
hmm
all levels, so that it becomes part of the everyday. It's not just something that the leader does or the coach does. It's something that we all do. I've been coached by my 19-year-old son. You met him,
mm.
JR, my biomedical engineer. I get coached by him all the time. And it's kind of hard because you wouldn't think he has the skills, but he understands that at that moment, he has something to give to me that will make me better connect to him. And that
Mm.
becomes the culture of it's normal. Everyone does it, not just a few people. And I think that that's what we need to switch from it's just the only person that can coach me is the person who's walked those shoes or who's done that. You
Yeah.
can learn, you have to have a learning heart and to be coachable. There are people that tell me I had a client who's like, I'm 71 years old. What can you possibly teach me or coach me about? And
Yeah.
we have a great relationship now because we had a conversation about what his needs and dreams were for his retirement. And he's like, I never thought that somebody who was like 40 years younger than me, what, 30, we even tell me anything. So how do we change the mindset? It's by being consistent, understanding what it is and using the right language and then demonstrating the behavior, in my opinion.
Yeah. So as you're speaking, you reminded me of Peter Hawkins
Ooh.
creating a coaching culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that model he has. And the last two steps of the model are exactly what you're describing. it just becomes the way we do things here. And then the final step that Peter talks about is we even behave that way with all of our stakeholders, not just internally, but now externally. We're we're leading with a coaching style with our suppliers, with our stakeholders, with our customers. How about you, Lucas? What does it mean to create and lead as a coach and create a coaching culture?
Yeah, and I like where this is going because it's like when you say like magic or whatever, you want to peel that back and figure out what that means practically. And like, I think Veronica, that idea of like being able to knock down the barriers and like, okay, like next time I talk to somebody that's older than me, younger than me, looks different than me, different background, hopefully like I'm not gonna have that same hesitation to communicate and have those conversations or work together. So I think like one of the things, like one of the outcomes of the coaching culture is just less barriers between
Mm,
people that are
Yes.
different from each other and just being more open.
yeah, I love that. So for me, it's all about you mentioned it, a growth mindset, Veronica. And as a leader, what is my role and responsibility if I'm coaching from or if I'm leading from a coaching place? It's to grow the person that I'm leading
Hmm.
and that they're not the same person tomorrow. And so thinking, how might I use this opportunity to grow this person rather than just transactionally interact and say, here's two pieces of bread and a piece of meat, go make a sandwich, right? Get into the place where what actually should we think about and how do we grow together? So one of the things I would ask of you, Veronica, is you're obviously a successful person, and a lot of our listeners are coming up thinking about how to break out, become exceptionally successful, not to be judgmental or anything, just they want to break out of the pack and be successful in whatever they're choosing to do. What's one of your secrets of success?
Whew, you got all kinds of tough questions today. I think that one of the things I learned as I got a little older was authenticity and the importance to find your own way, right? I think there's so much in the media around us that tell us how to be, how to behave, who to become, and what success looks like. If you're not married by 30 and have like this fortune and this career and this and all these other things, that you're not successful, but you gotta define it for yourself. What does that look like, and what do you need, and what skills can you use from the coaching, from leadership, from friendships, from education. I am pro education 100%. So being the best version of yourself means understanding what you want, who you are. And that means the flaws, right? There's moments that you're like, oh, that wasn't the best version of myself. Let me just address
Hmm.
that. Let me improve that so that I can go through it. I always felt I went through the ranks of the military. I went to the from E1 to E9. And as you know, only 1% of the community makes it to that. I think that what helped me was I never competed with people. I competed with standards. What's your standard? What is
Mm.
your expectation of me? What should I do to be a successful leader? Once I knew what the standards was, I was able to work with people and not compete with them. And that made me successful in many ways. And so I think that's important, understanding yourself, understanding your limitations, and not competing with each other, but learning from each other. And competing with the standards has been a lot easier for me than anything else. So that helped me.
I love that. I just wrote that down. I'm going to borrow that. I'll always cite you.
No, you use it. Let's share. It's community pool.
Yeah, I love that. So, one of our traditions here is Lucas gets to ask the last question. What's on your mind,
Mm.
Lucas? What do you need to know from Veronica before we leave?
What's a book you've read, or
Mm.
even if it's a movie or anything that you've kind of experienced or consumed in the media that has kind of inspired you lately?
Crucial conversations. How to have those conversations when stakes are high is one of my reason. They have crucial conversations, crucial confrontations, and crucial accountability. It's like a series. Oh, yes, yes. One of my. I also like At the Speed of Trust. I don't know if you guys read that one. It was one of my favorite as well. I think it's Stephen Covey talking about how the financial cost of trust in the workplace. So those are the two books that I read recently that I thought it was important. But I like crucial conversations because if we don't understand that we're telling a villain story, we don't understand that we're telling a victim story or a clever story, we'll be unable to create a useful story that have all parts so we can be better people. So I like books. I read books all the time, but those were the ones that stick in my mind right now. So thanks for
Thank you.
asking that easy question. That was easy.
Great. What did we not ask you that you thought we would ask you?
I think that the conversation was organic, and I'm glad, Lucas, that you were here because you represent the younger generation that we're talking about that's not here. So I think it was very, very complete.
Yeah, I
Great.
enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, we had a seminar we did in Seattle about 3 or 4 years ago. That's my alma mater, the University of Washington,
Oh,
for
wow.
my
Yeah.
undergrad work. And so they invited me back out, and we had 5 generations in the room for 3 hours.
Wow.
And it was one of the coolest conversations I've ever been a part of. And we broke them into 5 groups and rotated 5 times. You could never be in the same group twice. And so you talked to 5 different groups across 5 different generations for 3 hours. And when they left, I said, "You got to write on the board what's the one thing that you'd like to tell us as you're leaving." And almost exclusively, it was, "We are much more alike than we are different." Yeah, how incredible is that?
That's nice. But that's the contact theory, right? You had to be in contact with somebody different
Oh
than you so
yeah.
that you can see
Mm.
that we're not that much different. So I love it.
You said contact theory?
Yes, it's that theory of Allport where instead of, in the back in the 30s, how people were like, the more you deal with other people, the more racist you become. And what Gordon Allport found was that the contact theory is the opposite. The more you put different people in one place with some common goals of getting to know each other, the less likely you have the stereotypes and the biases and the
Mm.
questions and things like, oh, okay, I start to question yourself. So I like that one.
No, that's incredible because I always ask a question. So I do a session called The Power of Communication,
Ooh, that
about a
sounds fancy.
90-minute session. And I start with the very first slide. It's a driver yelling at somebody out of his car. Why are drivers so rude to one another? And it's exactly what you just described.
It's getting worse, by the way, lately.
It's because we're not interacting with each other. We don't have contact. I'm going to go do some homework on contact theory because I think you've put a name to exactly what I was trying to describe. There's a famous quote from Abraham Lincoln: "I don't like that person. I need to get to know them better."
Oh, wow. I read Lincoln on Leadership. I didn't see that one. That's a
Oh,
pretty good
yeah.
one.
That was one of my
Yeah.
first leadership books.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's really good, right?
God, I read that. Yeah, it's got to be 30 years old, very close to it, right? All right, Veronica, thanks for being here. It's been amazing. Let's stay in
Yes.
touch.
Definitely. Nice experience meeting you, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope to see you again.
Well, that concludes this episode of Building a Coaching Culture. I truly hope that this episode was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe stop and give us a rating or a review, and share this podcast with someone who might find it helpful as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.